In 2006, Josh McDowell wrote a book called New Evidence Which Demands a Verdict. And in this book, he outlined a lot of the research he had done over his long lifetime. See, Josh McDowell has written over 150 different books, either as an author or as a co-author. And all of it began with an important action. And that was he questioned what he believed. You see, when he first started out his journey as a young believer, he took everything that he thought and he questioned it. He said, I'm not really certain that this God individual is who I've always been told that he is. And so he actually viewed himself as agnostic and began undergoing an effort to try to prove that God was not who we all say he is, and that all of the historical evidence pointed against the existence of this individual named Jesus Christ. And in fact, what he would find out was the exact opposite, that the only logical conclusion is that Jesus Christ lived and that he was precisely who he said he was. You see, this journey of self-discovery can become very, very powerful, and it can lead to a faith that is far more everlasting than something that comes out of just a simple commitment that's made either at a summer camp or at a VBS or at something that a lot of us may have experienced in our own lives. It becomes necessary for us to stop, to critically think about what we believe, because that is how we continue on in our journey, becoming a more and more and more mature Christian, enabled and better trained to do more things that God is calling us to do. The journey of becoming a Christian starts out with most of us in some way, shape, or form acting as a seeker. Now, maybe being a seeker means that we grew up in the church and we just kind of weren't totally aware of exactly what all this stuff was that we were being told. Maybe that means we were not a part of a church and that we actually grew up as something completely different. But in any way, shape, or form, we start out as somebody who is curious, that kind of feels that pulling on our hearts. And you see, what we're trying to do is go from a seeker to being what some people have called a baby Christian. And that sounds a little funny to say, but really it's just saying that what we believe is something that is very simple. It's something that is just in its infancy and is intended to grow. The problem is that many Christians today stop at that point. They learn the basics, they understand some essential stories, they may have learned some things in Vacation Bible School when they were a kid or in Sunday school, but that's where their understanding of God stops. And because of that, when their faith is challenged by hard circumstances or by a world that is not supportive of what you think, they quickly crumble. The journey of becoming a Christian is not to stop there, but is to continue on to become a more and more mature individual. What you guys will read here in just a second is one area where Paul basically exhorts a group of individuals and says that we want to leave behind the things of elementary faith and move on to maturity. It's that idea of becoming more and more engrossed in what we believe, not just so we can have an academic understanding of things, but so that we have a faith that can stand the test of time. But let's not get too comfortable if we start thinking, well, I understand the Bible pretty well, because some of us, may sit here and say, well, I grew up in a Christian school. I didn't, but, a lot of people have that background where, Bible stories were just kind of pounded into their mind. And when you get to that point, it can be easy to sit here and say, you know what, I've reached that point. I know everything I need to know. I know more than I feel like a lot of other people know, and so I'm good to go, right? But once again, there's a warning in there. The journey never stops. You see, a lot of times we have this idea that becoming a Christian is about, somehow getting to a point where we are holy enough or where we understand holiness enough that we're good, that we're at this state where we're, kind of capped off, where we're at a place that we are happy and we're happy and God's probably happy too. But that totally misses the point, that the Christian faith is not a faith of us continually getting more and more and more holy until we're at a sufficient level of maturity. Instead, it's a faith of coming to grips with the fact that we cannot become holy enough to save ourselves, but we want desperately to understand deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper the full breadth of the love and grace of the Christ who paid it all. Over the last several weeks, we have tried to look deeper at this idea of questioning everything. We've tried to look at different areas where people either read the Bible in certain ways, or maybe they try to interpret the world around them in certain ways that kind of seems more convenient, or it's something that's easier for them to latch onto. But so often when we read the Bible, we're confronted with things that are difficult or that are uncomfortable and that challenge the way that we look at the world around us. Maybe they even challenge our very identity itself. That can be something that can be absolutely terrifying, and so many of us will have a tendency to have the opportunity to look ourselves, but blindly look the other way because we're afraid at what we might see. One concept that goes along with this whole concept of questioning everything is actually questioning ourselves, what we believe, the things that we struggle with in the areas that we have a hard time opening up and dissecting and exposing to the truth. There's this concept in philosophy which can be broken down into 4 basic pillars that's called epistemology. And what epistemology is essentially saying that there is a limit to what we can actually know, our concept of knowledge. And this also applies to our own self, that we can have this limitation of how much we know about ourselves, which can lead us to have a faith that maybe appears hypocritical. Maybe it leads us to do things that are inconsistent with the God that we claim to follow. And this is why it becomes so important to question everything about what we believe, not just for what other people have told us, but also question what we actually believe if we were being honest with ourselves, and how that impacts our day-to-day life. As I was sitting here and I was studying for this lesson, I came across something in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, and there were a few verses in here that I started kind of dissecting over and over again because it talked a little bit about kind of this internal struggle of us knowing ourselves and fighting with ourselves. One of the commentaries that I saw that broke this out a little bit is called a McLaren commentary. That's a pretty popular one that you can readily find yourself online. And I wanted to read you just a piece that comes out of this commentary. There is the fortress of ignorance. Most men who are kept from Christ are so because they know neither themselves nor God. The most widely prevailing characteristic of the superficial life of most men is their absolute unconsciousness of the fact of sin. They neither know it is as universal nor as personal. They have never gone deeply enough down into the depths of their own hearts to have come up scared at the ugly things that lie sleeping there, nor have they ever reflected on their own conduct with sufficient gravity to discern its aberrations from the law of right. Hence, the average man is quite unconscious of sin, and is a complete stranger to himself. The cup has been drunk by and intoxicated the world, and the masses of men are quite unaware that it has intoxicated them. When I read the words of this commentary, it's something that convicts even me. I mean, I sit here and I read these scriptures all the time, and I study them, and I go in depth into, Greek words and Hebrew words and history and context and all that kind of stuff. But sometimes the most basic thing that I falter on is taking these words and then applying them to my own life and saying, where do these reveal a flaw in me? And if I'm being honest with myself, it's because that is absolutely terrifying, because it might reveal where I am insufficient. But I think that's why it becomes so important for us to be willing to question everything, including ourselves. Because in doing that, we might discover that we are in fact insufficient. And in doing that, it might actually reveal exactly how sufficient Christ has become in our lives. I think we can all benefit from a little bit of self-awareness. This idea of looking in at ourselves and where our strengths are, where our weaknesses are, where areas are that we need to work on the most. This is especially true when it comes to our spiritual lives. Understanding where God is actively working in our lives and where God may be trying to shed a little bit of light on something that we keep tucked away. God already knows our hearts. Sometimes He's just waiting on us to know ourselves as well as He knows us. God may be speaking something into your life, and if He is, we should listen to him. We should try to stop for one moment, stop looking at other people, stop looking at the world around us and pointing fingers at other circumstances and people and constructs or whatever it is in this world, maybe, causing us to sin, and instead realize where God is calling us to something bigger, where he is calling us to something higher and calling us to a greater purpose. So, in wrapping up this entire series of questioning everything, I would say that if you don't question anything else that you've been told, that you've seen, that you've heard, then question yourself. Because in doing that, you may just find where God is illuminating an area where he says, I know that you're not sufficient, but that's okay, because I am. And I am calling you to something that is greater and that is bigger than what you can do on your own. Question everything, including yourself, because you never know when God might be calling you to something bigger than what you think you are. That's our lesson that we have for you today. I hope you're able to get something out of it. And until we can meet again, God bless.